like to call this meeting to order. If we could all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. I am briefly presiding at this point as superintendent because the order of the business initially is the election of the chair, the vice chair, and the secretary. Once the chair is elected, I will hand the gavel back or to that chair. So at this point, I'd like to open for the board for nominations to be the chair of the Board of Education for the Weston Public Schools. The nominations are open, please.
If I may have the floor, please.
Please.
So it has been my pleasure to be the chair of this board for the past 2 years, and I don't know if everybody realizes I don't necessarily talk about my personal life when I'm sitting in this chair, but I do have twins who are juniors at the high school and getting ready to embark on Thursday night with the college kickoff series. I'm going to have my hands full for the next year with personal matters. I'm lucky I have 3 kids who do a wonderful variety of activities, and I just really need to take a step back right now and put mom mode in first place. But it is truly an honor to have a chance to nominate Tony Pesco as the chair of the Board of Education.
Thank you. So I'll put on into the nominations Tony Pesco. Other nominations? Is there a second on that nomination? Any discussion? I understand that we have typically done this by a show of hands for votes as opposed to written ballot. So all those in favor of the nomination of Tony Pesco to be chair of the Weston Board of Education, raise your hands, please. Voting for yourself. And any opposed? So that passes 6-0 because we're at this point you are a 6-member board. So congratulations, Tony. If I may, as superintendent, before I pass the gavel, welcome you into this seat. I know the entire administration looks forward to working with you, and I know the entire administration joins me in thanking Gina Albert for her incredible leadership these last couple years. You've guided us and the board through transitions, and we're so pleased you'll still be on the board, and completely respect and honor your decision. And again, we also applaud you arriving to the seat, Tony. We are in good hands, as we were with Gina, as we were with Ellen before, so the tradition continues, sir. So here's the gavel.
Thank you. Before we go on to the other nominations, let me say a few words. On behalf of the board, I also want to education and contributions over the last couple of years as chair. It hasn't been easy dealing with all of us. And I know I have some big shoes to fill, but I'm happy to do it. And thank you again. But you're only a few seats away, and I'm sure we're going to lean on you for your rest of your term, or however you plan on spending on the board for your continued energy, support, and contribution. We're a young board. I mean, I have 2 years on the board. Gina's 2 years, and that's the longest tenure. And so it's going to really rely on all of us working together and making sure that we work through some of the really big issues we need to work through this year as a team, and provide the community, the staff, the administration, and the students with the transparency that we owe them in terms of how we deliberate and come to our decisions. With that, I'll just hand it over to Bill.
You get to now do all the work, sir.
Oh, great. So now
I'm your wingman. I'm guiding you into the next part.
So now we open nominations for vice chair of the Board of Education. So let's open nominations.
I would like to nominate Melissa Walker. I'll second that.
Okay. Any other nominations? Okay. Any discussion? Okay. I recognize Gina.
I just want to say, Melissa, I know you haven't been on the board all that long, but I've had the pleasure of working with you your entire tenure, and particularly your work this past fall on our negotiations with 2 unions at the same time. You definitely bring a very level-headed, thoughtful approach to our work, and I think it will be a great asset to this board to have you in that chair.
Okay, let's move to a vote. All in favor? Opposed? Congratulations. Now we open nominations for Secretary of the Board of Education.
I'd like to nominate Ruby Hedge, please.
We have a second? Thank you, Melissa. Discussion? Okay, let's move to a vote. All in favor? Opposed? Congratulations, Secretary. Okay, let's move to the business at hand. The next topic are recognitions.
Great. So I would ask Ken Craw to join me. And are you going to join us, Tony?
Sure.
And I'd like Amy Holmes to come forward, please. So Amy, you're on a roll of being correctly and rightly and appropriately recognized for many decades of service here in Weston. I'll let Ken give the numbers in a second. In a few weeks, you will go upstate. I don't know if in Connecticut they talk about that, but in the Midwest we talk about downstate and upstate. We're going to go upstate to be honored with a little over 100 other teachers from all across the state for being amongst the premier. In my knowledge, based on what I've witnessed here going on 4 years, from what I've heard, what you wrote, what people about you wrote, you are at the lead of that group of 100. We all think that, we all know that, and to be in this district with the achievements we have, and for how long you've been here, both at the middle school and the high school, to be a leader for us, you truly are a leader for everybody. So thank you very much.
And on this night of nominations and selections, I just want to remind everyone that Amy was identified, nominated by her peers in the Weston Public Schools, and through a rigorous process was selected through committee, through interviews, and we couldn't be more pleased for you representing the district at the state level on December 4th at the Bushnell in Hartford. And, you know, I was your principal for 4 years. Lisa's been your principal for probably 12, how many? 8 years? Many. A lot. At any rate, I mean, there are just so many adjectives that come to mind when I think of Amy Holmes, English teacher, 7th grade, high school, and first and foremost is the dedication and the work ethic. So we joked a little bit at convocation. We gave Amy a wheelie cart for all the papers she brings home and all the correcting that goes along with being an English teacher. But it's much more than that. It's the thought that goes into the work for every student that she touches and you know, tries to bring along to the next level. It's her collaborative nature with her colleagues. The kind sign, we should probably get a picture with you as the I in kind. That's a big piece of it as well. And I just really appreciate you know, just all your efforts over the years, and I'm sure your students do as well. So with that, Tony.
Thank you. You know, when I stand up here, I'm really in awe of you and people like you who really dedicate so much to our community, our students, and the district. And on behalf of the Board of Education, we have a little something for you. And congratulations again. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. We have one more recognition.
There's a
The
motion
PTO?
first.
Oh. To read a motion first. Can we have a motion?
Move that the Weston Board of Education recognize Amy Holmes, Weston 2020 Teacher of the Year, for her outstanding service to the students of Weston.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Motion passed.
And
Congratulations.
Amy and Jeff, I will add a little aside. As you know, in front of all of the faculty, we talked about the convocation, but in June, when some tall guy was able to announce you, I did read from one of your recommenders, and they mentioned the bag. There's not a bag in that box. Amy is known for the bag she uses to carry all of her books and all the rest, which may explain the satchel or the whatever it was on wheels that was given. But in that lovely box is not a lovely bag. It's something nicer. So enjoy. And I'm also allowed to say, Amy and Jeff, you can leave whenever you want. You don't have to stay.
Yeah.
So, but if you want to stay for the whole meeting, there's an incredible report on statistics and enrollment data. It's just, it's scintillating. Don't run.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
The next recognition is we, as a district, are incredibly blessed by all types of generosity, the Western Education Foundation, but day in and day out, the PTO is here with, as I like to say, time, treasure, and talent. Tonight, we're thanking bringing to the board to thank the Weston High School PTO for 3 donations this fall. $4,000 for the principal's 2019-20 discretionary fund. That's an increase of $1,000. Quick, someone do the math for that for me, Phil. Is that about a 25% increase? Am I getting that right, sir? So that's quite a significant increase. $2,000 towards high school staff professional development to help teachers with additional educational training, and then $370 towards the high school company middle school short wharf program ads. So this is incredibly generous, but in many ways it's just a drop in the bucket of everything that the Weston PTO does, both at the high school and across the other 3 schools. So they're not here to receive the recognition, but we like to, every time these awards are here, to bring those to the attention of the board.
Can we have a motion, please?
Move that the Weston Board of Education recognize the generous donations to Weston High School on behalf of the Weston High School PTO.
Second? Thank you, Hillary. All in favor? And again, I echo Bill's comments in terms of really being very appreciative and all that the Weston PTO does, both monetarily and in other ways to support the district. Thanks again.
Public comment.
Now we move to public comment. Anyone in the public that wishes to step up and make comments, please just identify yourself with your name and address. Start public comment now. Okay. Guess the public is quiet tonight. Let's move to the approval of the minutes. We did have one adjustment to the minutes.
Take a motion first. and
Oh, okay.
then comments.
All right. Can we have a motion?
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the minutes from the October 21st, 2019 executive session and regular session.
Can we have a second? Thanks, Taffy. Discussion, comment?
Edits, yeah. I just have one edit, and that was around budget assumptions. Just let the record be shown that I actually abstained from that vote. And it was, if you remember, I brought it up like 5 minutes later around the motion of the way that it was worded. But just let the record know that I abstained from that vote.
Mm-hmm. All in favor of approving the minutes with those adjustments and edits? Thank you. Now we move to the student representatives on the board for an update. Okay, thank you.
Hello. So this week we're starting the 26 Days of Kindness initiative at Weston High School starting tomorrow. It is a movement that is honoring those in the Sandy Hook tragedy. So it's from November 19th to December 14th. And tomorrow is our kickoff. So what we're doing tomorrow is that we're going to be handing out stickers in the lobby that have the logo on them. We have a food drive, an annual food drive, but this year it's going to be during the 26 Days of Kindness period. So it's going to be a holiday drive, a food drive, different articles of clothing as well, and they're all benefiting the Weston Food Pantry. In addition, in the lobby on Friday morning, we're going to have kindness pledges where students are going to be able to fill out slips of paper in the shape of Ben's bells from 26 Days of Kindness and Sandy Hook Promise. And we're going to put them on our wall in the library in the shape of kind of just a giant mass of all of these kindness pledges that students will do throughout this 26 days. In addition, each grade is going to be taking kind of charge of this movement 1 week out of the about 4 weeks that it's going on. So the junior grade, the student government, is kind of heading that kickoff this week. And they're going to do different things for the school. So I know the junior student government this week, for one of the days, is going to do a free bake sale in the lobby. They're also going to have name tags that students can wear all day so that other students will kind of approach them, saying their name, greeting them, kind of a way to spread social calmness throughout our school. In addition, we're going to be having an assembly, and we don't know the exact date of that yet, but it's going to fall within the 26 Days of Kindness, and we're going to have a drum circle in the morning of, which is always really nice to get our musicians involved. In addition, we're going to have a speaker. We're going to have our a cappella club singing, which is always awesome. They're so beautiful and so talented. And then each victim from from Sandy Hook is going to be honored in a pledge that a student or a faculty member will speak out loud at the assembly, just a few sentences commemorating them. In addition, we're going to have some spoken word poetry, and the faculty at the end is going to be performing a secret song that they won't tell us what it is, but we're super excited for that. In addition, during the 26 Days of Kindness on December 3rd, there's a national movement called Giving Tuesday, and essentially what that is, it's what the organization preaches is that it's a day that encourages people to do good, and there's no specific way in which an organization or a school can participate in Giving Tuesday. It's just a way that our community can do good for one another, and we're really preaching the whole kindness idea, especially for Giving Tuesday. So Weston Against Cancer is going to be heading this like they did last year with a free bake sale in the lobby, giving to all the students who kind of pledged to do something kind that day, going beyond the 26 Days of Kindness. So that.
So something I feel I should mention first is a little small initiative that we kind of accomplished as student government is we bought name tags for all of the Chartwell's employees so we can thank them like personally, because I think that really deepens any connection that the students have with them and makes everyone happier, and it obviously has to do with 26 Days of Kindness, making everyone feel included and part of the Weston community. Otherwise, kind of hard to put a quantitative measure on this, but the amount of spirit that we've seen recently has kind of been off the charts, especially after homecoming week, which was a massive success. Hopefully that doesn't come across as arrogant, but the football game was very spirited. The floats were a huge hit. We had, I think it was the most attendance I've ever seen at a football game across all my 4 years of high school, so that was cool. Powder Puff, which I sadly was not there for personally, was phenomenal, or so I heard, and the senior girls won again, but we had lots of other cool activities like a field goal kicking contest, and it was really good at getting students and staff all involved in one single community. The night activities were also a huge success. We had about 135 students, which is a pretty significant chunk of the student body, at floor hockey, which is always a fan favorite, and we had decent numbers for trivia night, which will never attract as much popularity, but that was still fun for us too. we can't talk much about the other grades in student government, but as regarding to the seniors, we've had lots of successes in working with the PTO parent reps and like making seniors special. We made rally towels for the Powder Puff game and homecoming game. The PTO and the seniors collaborated on a nice breakfast for all the seniors one morning. That was yummy. And the senior girls are currently organizing their annual swag, so they're putting out some sweatshirts, shirts, and sweatpants. And another large thing that we've been spending time on is mindfulness in advisory. So we've been having longer advisory periods and more often advisory times, and we've been working with a method called dialectical behavioral therapy, and what we're really trying to do is show students that we are capable of having a wise mind that is somewhere in between a rational mind and an emotional mind. And we've been conducting activities like meditation and placing students in hypothetical situations of, this happens, what do you do? What would you want to do if you were speaking in terms of solely emotions or solely logical? And then what is that wise, happy medium? So we've been stressing this mindfulness a lot because it really goes hand in hand with our themes about humankind and being present in the now. Like, get off your phones, try to enjoy the moment, and really trying to take the stress away from school, because school takes up such a significant portion of our time, and we want to make sure that it's the best possible allocatment of it. Really, we're all happy and satisfied.
That's great. Make sure the minutes reflect that school spirits is off the charts.
Thank you.
Which, I mean, all kidding aside, that is contagious. That's got to be contagious throughout the school and throughout the district. That's great to hear. Any other comments from the board?
I just want to say your reports are contribute so much to this meeting. And so
Thank you.
don't think you know we're just being nice by having you here. Like, this is it's really very helpful, and it really is what our work is about. So thank you.
Yep.
And I think that the mindfulness work would help all of us at this table if we could.
Thank you.
You're free to stay, or yeah, I'm sure you're busy with other things and free to go. Thank you again.
You might enjoy the statistical report because it's largely about those who just left, but your choice.
Let's move to new business now. Weston High School Class 2019 Statistical Report.
Good evening, everyone. So I think for some board members, I don't know if you know the person to my right. This is Meredith Starzik, Director of School Counseling for the high school. Of course, you know Lisa. Together, we're very proud to present the annual statistical report. This is the second of two reports related to the performance of Weston Public School students. As you recall, at the last meeting, we focused on the standardized test that the state gives annually, the SBA and the school day SBA, SAT, excuse me. And tonight, we're actually going to focus primarily on the class of 2019, the current freshmen in college. And I think one of the themes that you're going to hear tonight is that they've continued this tradition of excellence. This class, the class of 2019, performed very well. While we know every class, every student is unique, what is in common, the common trend is that these students did very well for themselves, and they're on their way to great success in their lives. And we do want to just recognize at the outset the hard work of the students, the families that support them, and the teachers and administrators who are working with them regularly. There were 206 students in the graduating class, and tonight I'm briefly going to highlight the SAT, ACT results. Lisa will talk about the AP results, and then Meredith will delve right into the college admissions processes. And I think, the real value of tonight is, after we give a short presentation, you've had the report, is the questions, the opportunity to really ask questions and, to delve further. So if we start to look at the class of 2019, 206 students, one thing I should point out, if you look on page 5, is the current SAT that students take is, this was the third year of results that we have. Certainly, we look at the school day SAT results, but the results you see here reflect the students' best performance. So if they've taken the SAT multiple times, these numbers reflect that student's best effort in math, in evidence-based reading and writing. And previously, the SAT had 3 sections: critical reading, math, and writing. Currently, we have here the EBRW and the math. A student can choose to take the writing, and we did have some students whose colleges required that, and they did that. But what you see here, 183 of those 206 students took the SAT, and you can see that, anytime you have results where the combined score is over 1,200, you're likely putting the class in the top 5 in the state. Now, the state results for the SAT, that's well above the trend. But in terms of the DIRG, unlike the school day SAT, we do not readily get those results for the DIRG so that we can make those comparisons easily. What we do is we do try to do some research behind the scenes. Anecdotally, we talk to other districts, but it's not like the school day SAT where that's reported out to us publicly. And there are some school districts that don't release that information. So I just wanted to give that background. But then, moving to the ACT, we do have a multi-year trend, 5-year trend, and you can see that consistently those scores are very high, and that we have maintained a number of students who are taking both. Both the SAT and ACT, 54% of students took both. 140 students took the ACT, 183 students took the SAT. And one of the things we look for is, what percentage of students met all 4 benchmarks on the SAT and the ACT. And for both, it actually, just as it turned out, was 79% met the benchmarks for SAT and ACT for both, which is great. So these are excellent results. The AP scores are outstanding, and Lisa will go into those, and we can talk a little bit about some of those courses as well.
It's fine, right? Thank you, Dr. Craw. We did have very solid performance with our AP scores this year, which we are really very proud of. If you will look on page 7, for the AP Scholar Awards, and you can see all of the definitions of if it's a 3-year better, or if it's a certain number of a 3.25 on APs and a score of 3 or higher on 4 tests, and then it gets up to 4 or higher exams. What I think is impressive is out of the, you look at out of the 287 unique students that took this test, 156 or 54% were designated as an AP Scholar, which I'm very proud of that. On page 8, you can see the chart and the course and everything spelled out for you. And I look at the scores and I look at the growth. Sometimes the growth is a little bit more, a little bit less. As long as we are sustaining a solid performance, we are pleased. But what I like to also do is to look at the instructional story behind the scores, if you will. For example, there are 26 courses listed, out of the 26 courses, we offer 22 of those courses that particular year. For example, we do not offer German, but there was a student that wanted to take it, and we were so happy he did and scored a perfect score for a 5. But when you look at, for example, biology, and you might say, wow, you know, usually we had about 80 students take AP biology. Well, this is the first year that we have AP environmental science, which was offered for the first time. And I'm really happy to see those scores. When you look down at the AP environmental science of the 40 students in there, you know, to have a 3.5 the first year that we're teaching the program, it speaks to, you know, the higher that we were able to get a veteran teacher that was very, you know, well-versed in how to teach AP environmental. If you look at the econ, we have the macro and the micro, and you see the enrollment in both. I mean, last year it went from, you know, 21 to 42 students took it in the spring. In our econ program, we also had a new teacher, and the PTO supported him attending Taft. It was Mr. Mater that, lo and behold, had an econ degree, dusted it off, and has found a new passion for teaching the AP econ program, and we're really pleased to see that performance with him. If you look down at the AP Gov class, for example, you'll see that we have 113 students that take it, and we still have 29 students who did not pass that course. However, this year is the first year that we are offering the course as a year-long course, which the other schools in our DERG have been doing. So we're really happy about that. I can't wait to see the scores, as Mr. Mater is also looking forward to seeing them after they've had it for a year. Because, you know, when you take the course first semester, you're at a disadvantage in May when you take the exam. So, you know, you think to yourself, well, why were there 29 students that weren't able to pass? Well, that was in that cohort, and they had to fit in all of the materials. So we want to thank the board for supporting that new course this year to have the duration for the year. And then we look at, I'm really happy to see the growth in studio art. That was an area of focus also, that the, you know, we went up there to a 3.14, and our language scores are very strong. Especially pleased with the 18 students that received a 5 in the AP Spanish. Currently, we do not have AP Chinese because we have a 4-year sequence, and that's not quite enough to be able to offer the AP Chinese, but who knows what the future may bring with our language offerings, and if we'll be able to offer that in the future. And then music theory. This year we have AP Music Theory. We sent 2 teachers to Taft, and so that will be an interesting area next year to see how did our music theory students fare. But overall, you know, I have to say that I'm really pleased. You look at the Calc AB scores, we had a different teacher this particular year teaching it. Mr. Joyce, who had taught it for many years, did not teach it this year. He taught the BC, and as you know, he's part of the Project Lead the Way program, but to look at those calc scores and see a 4.68, that's great for an average when we had Mr. Sadler had taken over that course. So there's always sort of a story behind the scores that speaks to not only the instruction, but how we keep looking to ways to improve and to develop the level of expertise of our staff to be able to deliver a quality AP program.
And by the way, all of those scores were either at or above the global average for every one of those tests.
Of course.
Does it typically take a few years of offering the course to kind of, you know, get into a rhythm and the test score, you know, the scores going? Is that how it usually works?
You know, it depends. I have to say that it really depends a lot on, it depends on the cohort of students.
Right.
Their preparation before, and it also, you know, these courses are very challenging to deliver.
Right.
And so, you know, when I look at the AP Econ, for example, it was Mr. Mater's first year teaching it, and he really, I mean, by the scores, from my perspective, knocked it out of the park because he spent so much time that summer he spent the whole month of July preparing for
Right.
it. And it speaks to the level of commitment of the staff, because they're pretty intensive courses.
And I would even also add to that I'm sorry. Someone check.
Go ahead.
The AP curriculum, AP College Board will have teachers do updates and change the curriculum. So sometimes we'll see some fluctuations in that. I know 2 years ago, AP Bio went through a review where the curriculum changed. So sometimes that affects it as well.
If we could just get through the report, and
Yeah.
then I think holistically, we could probably take more questions afterwards.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the college admissions process for the class of 2019 and talk about some of the statistics and also go through some of the terminology with all of you so everyone's aware of what everything means throughout this process. One new statistic that I thought was interesting for the class of 2019, we had 50 students of the 202 who put applications out to schools not receive a denial. So 25% of the class received all acceptances. So I thought that was kind of an interesting statistic to put out there that we have not tracked before. But if you want to look at pages 9 and also pages 9 and 10, you will see the application statistics from year to year. They're pretty much consistent from 2017, 18, and 19. The overall acceptance percentage is around 50%. Our average number of applications per student is still hovering around 9 applications per student. And we also have a total number of students who are submitting applications in the high 90%. So that's been pretty consistent over the last 3 years. On page 10, it goes a little bit more into our outcomes, referencing 2-year schools, 4-year schools, and also students who may be looking at doing a post-grad year, military, etc., gap year. Our 4-year college percentage still remains high at 95%. And we still have some students, as you can see, one taking a PG year, one deciding to go to the military, and then a gap year. We also had about 5 students who were undecided at the point of us taking our statistics, not sure if they wanted to do any post-grad work or if they were going to be starting at a local community college. But I have to say our outcomes have remained pretty stable and similar over the last 3 years for the outcomes. And when you start looking at page 11, we start looking at some of the programs to which our students apply. So page 11 gives some charts on our early application programs. The first program or chart actually refers to early decision 1 and 2 and something that's called REA. If you're not familiar with that, that's called restrictive early action. So these are the 3 early programs where students are pretty much looking to commit to a school. If you are applying early decision 1 or early decision 2 to a school, if you are accepted to that institution, you need to withdraw all applications and go to that school. So you are letting them know that you are committed to them. Then they threw in a couple of years ago, or probably now more 5 or 6 years ago, they threw in something called restrictive early action. So you're not committed to go to that school if you're accepted. However, you cannot apply early decision to any other schools. So they kind of get you to commit in a certain roundabout way, but you're not bound to go.
Right.
So that was one cohort I wanted to take a look at for the class of 2019. And as you can see, we had 78 applications in those programs, and we had 48 acceptances. So that's about 62% of the students who applied in those programs for the class of 2019. Now, below that chart, we look at early action, rolling, and priority. These are all of the other early programs that are non-binding. Okay, so you can apply to multiple schools early action. You can apply multiple schools rolling or priority. Sometimes these have to do with scholarships, or sometimes these have to do with students just wanting to hear early on the process about some decisions, and it may help with some strategy later on for regular. And this tends to be very popular with our students. As you can see at the bottom, for the class of 2019, 88% of the students applied in an early program. So that means by November 15th, which is usually the last day for an early program, 88% of the class of 2019 had applied to schools. So that's definitely something just to think about when you're talking about the terms of the process. Also, something that's really nice, I think, as a statistic to look at, of the 166 seniors that did apply early in an early program, at least 86% of them received at least one acceptance. Okay, so 86% of those students had one acceptance by December 15th is when these students usually hear back. Okay, so I thought that was some interesting things about the admissions programs. If you move on to page 12, this is where we report on the Barron's selective rankings as far as how Barron's defines certain colleges. Okay, and generally how they do this, and you can kind of read a little bit through on some of the indicators and some of the lists of schools that we provide, but basically it's based on their acceptance rate. So the lower the acceptance rate for that total institution, they get a higher ranking according to Barron's. So you can see that for most competitive and for highly competitive schools, what our acceptance rates were for the class of 2019. And I'd like to say, so for most competitive schools, the general acceptance rate for those schools that fall into that category is between 10 and 20%. So we are above the acceptance rate for those categories, which I think is great. And the same for the highly competitive as well. That acceptance rate for those schools is between 20 to 30%. And then I just would like to turn your attention to page 15, which is the class of 2019 matriculation, where the students of 2019 have ended up. We also put down that there were multiple students attending those institutions. I can also tell you the top 5 most attended institutions from the class of 2019. That is UConn, Michigan State, Elon, Indiana, and Syracuse. Those were our top 5 of the schools. And then lastly, I would just like to talk a little bit about some of the new initiatives that we've had. This is around page 17 of your report, talking about Camp College. Camp College was a new initiative that the department ran in August. We had 60 seniors sign up to participate, and it was a 3-day program where they received instruction on the Common Application. They received essay help from some of our English teachers, and they also had some college admissions people come and give some advice on interviews, what they're looking for in an application, how they read a file, and also some insight into essay writing. So this was a really successful program, as you can see from the picture. Not only did everyone get a lot of great information about the application process, but they all got a great t-shirt to wear. So we took a nice picture at the end. So that was a really successful program, and we're going to be doing that again for class of 2020. Also, just a little update on the College and Career Center. Randy Green, this is her 2nd year at Weston High School, and just a couple of things that she does, and people are not aware, as our College and Career Counselor. She does make early calls to colleges every December. So those programs that I reported to you about early action, early decision, and some of the rolling schools, she does call schools. So for the class of 2019, she called 44 colleges individually and received feedback about our students who were applying. And basically just to kind of help the students, gauging them through the process, but also giving us great insight for the next class coming up. So what are they seeing in their application pools? Are the numbers increasing? Some schools are talking about how they're adding different programs and how they're trying to build those programs. So she personally touched base with 44 of those colleges last year, and she'll be doing that again this December. Also, I'm happy to report that by September 3rd, we have 186 seniors in the class of 2020. She personally met with 139 for personal individual appointments. And that's addition to the school counseling staff as well. So just wanted to kind of give you guys an update on how that position's been going, and we're very happy to have her, and we think we've had a lot of great success moving forward. Sure.
There's just one thing I wanted to add. When we look at Camp College and how important Camp College is, and it is wonderful for the seniors from the point of view that they get their Common App taken care of. But it's also really important for the counselors, because when you consider that each one of our counselors, Ms. Starzyk has a reduced load because she's the director of school counseling, but each one of the 4 counselors have on average between 40 and 44 seniors. Then you say, okay, 40 and 44 seniors is my caseload. I have to write between 86 and 91% of the letters have to be written by November 15th. And you can't write them too early because there's so much growth junior year. And so to be able to take those 60 students, which I actually looked at how many students were on each caseload, and it reduced it by, 25 to one counselor, 42% of our caseload went to Camp College. So those kinds of, some of those technical things are then taken off their plate at the beginning of the year when they're finishing their letters and getting all of them done by, it's a crunch for them to be able to get all of them done. And at the same time, there is a counselor and Ms. Green that meets with every college rep, over 200 reps. So we hope to increase, our goal is to increase Camp College next year by, let's get about 80 students to go. That would be huge, because it would also, help the counselors out with their workload in the fall. Thank you.
Okay. So we tried to be efficient. There's a lot here, but I'm sure you have questions for us.
Sure. Any questions?
Do you
Hillary?
have a percent of each class, I guess, so the class of 19 that's in AP, that took an AP?
The percent of students?
The percentage of students, because they're kind of put together, we had, for example, there were 287 unique students. So I don't believe we have it broken down by how many are seniors and how many are juniors. Do we have that? It's a little bit tricky, because we even have a couple of underclassmen, like, for example, the German language person, he's a sophomore. So there's a handful of them. Can we get that percentage, or it's harder to break it
Yeah,
out?
so my math skills are not great, but if you look at the total classes of 2019 and 2020, you're looking at 392 students. So if you look at the 200, and on Lisa's page, that was 200 and 200 and, I think it's higher than that.
287.
287, so 287 divided by 392 will give you for 2 grades.
It's for 2 grades, yeah, it's not for the 1 grade.
So the short answer is most students.
Right.
But we can get you a more definitive percentage.
Okay, that percentage is 73%, so, I have it right
That's
here.
great.
This report is always an amazing report because the statistics are always so impressive. But when you're not steeped in it, there's a lot of nuances here, right? One of the things that, and I think I asked the question last year, was when you look at test scores, when you talk to the colleges and look at the application pools and you take a look at where the students are going, there was always a trend now to look at the whole students rather than looking at the numbers only. How does all of this inform you of things we may want to do differently or not, maybe, in terms of looking at the trends, looking at where students are going, looking at how we're preparing them? Are we thinking about doing anything different given the way the colleges are changing and how they look at the students, or not?
I think what you're talking about is when you're looking at that holistic approach.
Yeah.
I think something that we're hearing from a lot of the colleges, they're looking at an applicant being very authentic in their application. So we're working with our students on making sure that they're working on those pieces of authenticity. So when they're talking about their resume, when we're talking about their essays, we're really having them focus on those pieces to make sure that their voices are heard, that the colleges really know who they are as a person. So those are actually the parts that I think are becoming more and more important in the application for students to start to differentiate themselves versus grades grades and test scores. So I know that's one thing that our department has been focusing on with them, really making them think about their essays and the application they put together.
And do you find that, like, the Camp College is really an effective way as a group of making sure you can tackle this as a group instead of one student at a time? At least you start early and get them to think about this as a group? I mean,
It was, we started as a big group.
Yeah.
And to do some of the nuts and bolts,
Bolts,
like
right.
logging onto Common App, what's your password, what's your username, that kind
Right.
of information. Then we broke down, and each student had a 20-minute individual meeting with their counselor and a 20-minute individual meeting with an English teacher. So it was a little bit of a snapshot, but we did try to keep our ratios as well, just for you to know that it was always 1 adult to 10 students when we were doing some of the smaller group work as well.
The big move was 2 years ago when we brought forth the request for the new counselor, Randy Green, and that was because of how intense the process has become and how front-loaded it is, and that has led to the Camp College as well. So we're in the midst of that. The other things that Meredith mentioned, I don't know if, Lisa, you have anything else to add?
No, I would just say that, like, for example, the essay, they start working on it junior year. Now, they might change their topic or something like that, but they work on it in the spring of their junior year, and they can get into the writing center and get individual help there. So it's continually sort of embedded in the things that we do, that they prepare themselves.
Are there any, may I? Are there any trends around how far back colleges are looking at a high school students, not only their transcript, but their life experiences, their co-curricular activities, the things they're involved in? Are they looking back to 9th grade and up, or are they looking at their junior and senior year only? Just any trends you're seeing there?
So they are looking at the whole high school experience. So they're looking from 9th grade to senior year, what they've been involved in. They also start picking it down to, they actually ask the students hours per week, weeks per year, that type of involvement to try to get down, is this something they just signed up to say they can put on a list, or is this something that they've been involved in for years? So they really do look at 9 through 12. Some of our students love to put some middle school experiences on there. If you can tie it maybe to a passion, sure, but they really are looking from 9th grade on.
I have a question. You mentioned that some of the students, they will take an AP course and they will take it first semester, and then they sit for the AP exam in the springtime. So they have those 3 to 4 months of not being in the subject on a daily basis. Do we offer any outside help to those students to kind of have a refresher course just to help prepare them when they sit for the AP exam in springtime?
Well, for the, it's really only AP Government. I mean, the macro, micro, econ, most of the students take both. So why it's semesterized, it's kind of a year long. But they do offer different things. Like Mr. Mader would offer reviews and things in the spring. They they'll do things in the evening. Even our year-long courses, because remember, if we have snow days, the AP date doesn't change. So if we lose a week or 4 or 5 days of school, that's curriculum, that's content that they didn't get to. So it's common in those kinds of situations with bad weather, or if it's the semesterized government course, to have evening sessions. They'll invite the students to come in the evening to get review, things like that. Or if there's something going on with, they can get extra time on a day that they're taking the school-based SAT. Sometimes they'll ask, please don't assign me to be a proctor. I want to be able to work with the kids. So they're very conscious of it. It's sort of a matter of pride for both the school and the AP teacher. They know the scores before I do. They get so excited when they come out in the summer. Did you see them? No, I didn't. I'm on vacation. But it's that kind of thing that they'll do whatever it takes to prepare them.
So Meredith, I know when Randy spoke with the high school PTO, she was talking about kind of the development she's doing with the rest of the counselors about helping how they write their letters of recommendation. You want to take a minute and like get that out, because I think that's a big part of what Randy's doing as well, is supporting the development of your staff.
Sure, counselors and teachers as well. She actually rolled out some samples of letters of recommendation for the faculty at a faculty meeting. Also, because when you're looking at a file, the average time an admissions representative spends on a file is 11 to 13 minutes. So we want to make sure that we're giving all the information that needs to be there for that admissions representative in that time that they're going to allow the file. So actually, she's shown us some samples of where we can condense our letters. So yes, we love to write these elaborate stories, about our students. But actually, what really benefits our students is by being very succinct and to the point about their accomplishments, some of their strengths, obviously things they've overcome. They love to hear that as well. So we've kind of broken them down into categories, and even some of our letters will even have bullet points on there. Like that's how much we've actually condensed them to just be very factual to support the student's application. So she's been working with the counselors on that, and she's also been sharing that with the faculty as well for teachers.
And then, Lisa, with some of the AP classes, like chemistry that has a low enrollment, or computer science, French, is this just challenges of schedule, student interest?
It's a mixture. Chemistry, chemistry, we watch very closely, the enrollment in chemistry, because I remember, probably, 11 years ago, there was a time we didn't offer it because the enrollment had gotten low. So it's really just a question of the cohort and the track that the particular students want to go in. This past year, there were 8. The year before that, there were 17. I believe we have 12 in the class now. So it depends on, again, if the chemistry is that student's passion, or is it environmental science or physics. With French, we have been looking at that. Students are not in the AP track, but they're in the standard level, and it's a mixed class. So what's the enrollment in that, how it breaks down. But I guess long and short, it really depends on, I wouldn't say it's so much they can't get in the course, it's what they want to focus on.
Any other questions?
So I know that you've spoken about sort of expanding your sphere to look at international colleges. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So I'm curious, now that you have Randy and, you're all together, do you have any strategies that you want to share with us in terms of going about that, or things that you're looking to add?
I can begin and Meredith can finish. So what we were looking at doing was inviting, there are some international colleges that come in the fall, every fall, but 2 years ago we had the sort of an international fair where we had more students come, more colleges come from the United Kingdom, Italy, Australia, Canada, Korea. There were a whole bunch of them. For our size, we're looking to do that every other year. So this is the year, correct? Do you want to add something?
So again, we're going to be offering it in the spring. We try to piggyback when all these representatives are in our area for a Hartford College Fair. So what we like to do is we will offer a information session for about 45 minutes where students and parents are invited to attend, and each college will give a little bit of a presentation about their school, and then we'll kind of break it up to like a fair situation where everyone's at their tables and families and students can go up and get some more information from those representatives. So we're going to be doing that. We're hoping for April. So we're going to look at our calendars and get the information out as soon as we have it scheduled.
Bill, you had a question?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Meredith, on page 12, in the comparisons of most competitive to highly competitive, I missed the Weston number, the comparative numbers nationally. For most competitive, you say the range is 10 to 20% acceptance?
So for most competitive, it's 10 to 20%, and for highly competitive, it's 20 to 30%.
Okay.
They used to
And-
say 35, but it's more like 30.
Right, so, one of the great challenges for us, in any community such as this, where it's 99% going to 4-year, we have some going to Norwalk Community College, we should embrace that for sure, and other opportunities, which is a question that's come up. I mean, we need to help students get the right match. Families look for the guarantee. There is no guarantee. I used to be in the independent school, Catholic school world, and there's no guarantee, no matter how much you pay for tuition. But this number leaps out. We are doing so far better than the average at placing students and helping students find that right match in by almost 20, 30% bigger difference. So we don't want to create that false expectation, but by doing the holistic work that we're doing, by adding Randy Green and everyone else to bolster a really, really good team that you have, we're beating the averages by a good margin. So you won't get the individual match guaranteed, but that's an impressive set of numbers.
Thanks, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would also comment that many of the colleges on the list, actually, where our students are going, some of the acceptance rates are in low single digits as well. So,
Yep.
And the only other thing that we haven't talked about tonight, we have in past years, is financial decisions loom large for families, and I think that affects what the list looks like. So I think we have to be respectful of that. That, some of these acceptances, the most popular schools may very well be providing much better packages. Those are all excellent schools at the top of the list, particularly with UConn honors. That's to be, but some communities get hung up on, why aren't I seeing the potted Ivies? Why aren't I seeing the Ivies? Well, if the financial package is better, we all in these days have to make those decisions.
Absolutely.
So I think we all have to respect that. But
Just one final question. I know recently we've been tracking our 5-year graduation rate. Do we have an updated number?
So they have now moved to a 6-year. So they're not releasing 2014 until 2020. I think their rationale is they've been seeing students nationally taking longer to graduate, so they feel like that numbers nationally, they wanted another year before they release them. So I'll definitely have that next year for you guys.
And on that, are they seeing students taking longer to graduate because they're taking gap years in between, or because they are just drawing it out, they're just having too much fun and don't want to leave?
I have to say, we haven't had that here yet at ours to investigate. But I think sometimes we hear a lot of students changing degrees.
Okay. Yeah.
Going in, and sometimes that, requires an additional year, or maybe transferring the school because the school doesn't have the program that they actually wanted to go to, so they have to change for that reason. So I think it's been more of that.
But it may be a positive trend that students are not feeling that pressure to finish in 4 years. Yeah, okay.
yeah, I mean, some of the National Institute for Independent Colleges and Universities has studied that, and there is the good news, the gap years. There's also just the financial pressures.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's true,
And
too.
so that statistic for us, as many know, has been an incredible statistic, close to 99%. And when the national average is 50% graduation in 5 years, and we know 30% of college-going freshmen drop out at Thanksgiving. So our statistics in that realm, and our sister districts there haven't been matching us either at that kind of rate. It's been more in the mid-80s. So I wait with good appetite for that 6-year number. My hunch is it'll play to our favor.
so you do this report once a year. I guess this is your opportunity to ask, what do you need from the board?
You take that one. No.
I thought I heard you. No, I think, as we talk through the budget process, if there are any tweaks that we can make, you'll see it there, and we'll come forward, with any adjustments that may be needed. And fair enough?
Okay, so you're not going to answer right now.
No, I mean, there's, unlike a couple years ago when we had a definitive,
Right.
I will answer.
plan, need, staffing concern, we
Yeah,
don't
right.
necessarily have that at this point.
I'll give you something to think about. I mean, the board was, and I sometimes accuse of overstating things. I'm not overstating this. They were brilliant, the board 2 years ago, in listening to, and it started with Meredith and Lisa the spring before, saying, this is a community focused on college preparation. Let's be clear and realistic about that. This department, I remember the conversations in Lisa's office, we're increasingly stressed, we're increasingly pressured. If you just look at the data on the EA, and by November, you got to get that work done, and you're just starting to get to know your seniors, we need to staff up. And so you made the argument, even in a very tight budget climate, where we've been cutting, you made the argument we need to add. So you added a great design. We landed Randy Green, which was incredible. Frankly, one of the best in this Tri-5 state, I'd argue almost nationally. You know, we landed her. I know your department is still stressed. Despite all this great work, the pressures only increase. Conversations last spring with some of your colleagues regarding Varsity Blues, the impact that's had on the sense of things in the community about what's real or not as to why you get into college. So I don't know if it's this budget cycle, but I'd urge the board to be open to how do you support this department, and I'm calling it a department that's so pivotal in terms of this high expectation for our community. I don't see this community changing anytime soon and being a college prep community, and we have to be able to respond. And the pressures are intense on Meredith and her team. Is that a fair comment?
Fair enough.
Yep.
Yeah, with on average, 9 applications per student, I guess.
And
I don't see the pressure going.
Yeah, and
going
coaching
down.
people to respond to that 11, 13-minute read.
Yeah.
I mean, you really have such an intense, close understanding of what's going on. It's very impressive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So next is the highly anticipated enrollment report.
Mike, do you need us to reposition so we can see the?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So Mike, while we're getting your show started, I'll just say a couple things. Mike will largely handle this entire presentation. He and I have chatted a little bit, as is the norm ahead of this, just to outline particular issues and questions, not just the longitudinal questions, but those most immediate for the board and in the town of Weston at this point. We brought Malone and McBroom on 2 years ago. We ran them parallel to the other demographic firm 2 years prior, so we had a comparison. As Mike will explain, this is a firm working with multiple districts across Connecticut. They're also a firm with a variety of capacities, demographic, econometrics, residential analysis, all the rest, and they're also working with Weston right now in some important town development work. So they're very well positioned to understand us, and Mike will speak to that.
Thanks, Bill. I'll just walk us through some of our various components of our typical projection report, and it's great to be back another year providing the annual update of not only sort of how your enrollment changed, why it changed, but also what your future trajectory looks like. As Bill mentioned, those that may not know us at Malone and McBroom, I'm the Director of Planning with the firm. I know last year I wasn't here to be able to present personally in front of the board, so I just wanted to be able to take a step back and just provide a little bit more of an understanding of who we are. For about 18 years, I've been doing demographic work throughout the state of Connecticut. In the last 10 years, we have branched out and are doing it throughout the Northeast as well as in the South, going as far down as South Carolina and some of the rapidly growing parts of our states. Within the state of Connecticut, we really are focused in several key areas. As you can see in the map on the upper right, the blue clustering of the communities, which in the last decade we've done our enrollment projection work in. is largely centered around Fairfield County and communities similar to yours, as well as throughout some of Connecticut's more complex urban systems, and then within southeastern Connecticut, and then a small few smattering of clients in between. And for these clients, we provide the typical annual enrollment projection reports, as well as comprehensive projection reports that would be useful or required as part of State Department of Education and construction grant building projects to be able to validate the future enrollment there. We also get involved in facility utilization studies, long-range planning, master planning, as well as the redistricting and reconfiguration studies. From the other side of my business is really the community planning side. I'm an AICP, American Institute of Certified Planners. We do a lot of comprehensive plans throughout the state of Connecticut. As part of our comprehensive plans, we also do master plans for areas looking at growth, looking at repositioning resources, as well as then sort of those zoning regulations that govern everything that we do. Embodied within that is where we get into our various residential growth studies, looking at how development projects will shape, change, and look at the services that they will now pivot and require your community to be able to provide. As Bill mentioned, we've been working with the town of Weston on their 10-year comprehensive plan. In Connecticut, it's known as a plan of conservation and development. It really looks at everything from land use regulations to natural resources to transportation to facility infrastructure, as well as demographics. And that is a plan that is now in draft form. And one of the key components of that plan has been a town center master plan, in which I personally led workshops over the course of the spring and summer in order to get public input on that. So I feel I have a pretty good understanding of not only your community from the school enrollment standpoint, but also the direction you're going to go as a town over the next decade from the year plus I've been working on that project. As part of our demographic updates, we always want to reflect back on what was our performance on our past work and be able to identify where we connected and where we didn't connect within the various grade cohorts across the board. Something for a number of years that is always challenging and has become even more so challenging in a community like Weston is to be able to project kindergarten enrollment. And when I looked back and was following the annual or the monthly reports, I was hoping that we would be spot on and get the exact number for kindergartners, but we were just one off there. So I should have bought a lottery ticket when I think we were tracking correctly there. But overall, we were happy with the performance for that. Typically, we've been tracking our benchmark for a decade plus, and we really strive to have each community within that 1%. I believe overall for Weston, we were at 0.5%, so well within our threshold and only off by about 12 students. We saw some of the biggest disconnect within grades 3 through 5. That's something that we saw some jumping around in some of the persistency ratios, so it's something we wanted to go in and refine that a little bit better. But overall, we were pleased with the overall trajectory and a lot of the assumptions as well as the model that drove this report. As we look ahead with all of our clients, we want to be able to give a 10-year projection, but also what we've learned going through a great recession and going through the boom before that is when you're projecting out 10 years, some pretty dramatic events can happen in between, so we want to ensure to be able to prepare projections under our low, medium, and high assumptions. This is no different than what we've prepared in the past for your community. And when I took a look back on our past projections with respect to each of the three models, they're all tracking in a very similar direction, so we haven't seen much change in what's in the enrollment drivers and really not much change in the 10-year trajectory overall for your community. One of the key components to really understanding where you're going to go in the future when you look at enrollment is getting into those different grade cohorts and looking at your historic enrollment and use that as a driver. So overall, you could see going back about a decade, you were really at your enrollment peak, and then you've hit a series of decline, plateau, decline, to get to where you're at today with 2,278 pre-K-12 students currently enrolled in the system, below that 2,400 average that has been we've been tracking for about 18 years, or 2,400 median we've been tracking for about 18 years worth of data. I always find the stacked bar chart very useful in that it takes a look at your effective grade groupings. It's how you organize your school buildings, and you could see the different waves of students as they move through your system. Even though your overall enrollment decline has slowed, we could see that we've seen some flattening within the pre-K2 enrollment. We see some stabilization overall happening at the lower grades, and then still the enrollment decline has not fully hit over in the stacked yellow bars, which represent the high school. One of the new pieces of information that we haven't provided in past reports, but we're providing in this one, is just taking a look back and being able to get a better understanding of your the composition of your student body. And what we did is going through the State Department of Ed, through the Ed site data repository, we were able to track back, going all the way back to 2007, and look at what the racial composition of the student body looks like. And we've noticed a lot of diversification really over the last 10 plus years with that continued increase. And our latest data point with that was 2018 and 19, where you stand at about 18% overall. We didn't have the official data for 19 and 20. That's something that's typically released later in the spring when the state goes through their typical process of finalizing all of the information. Diving down at a little bit finer grain scale, looking at the pre-K2 enrollment for the system, we see that overall you stand, according to the October 1st enrollment, which is really the snapshot in time when all the enrollments or all enrollment projections are based upon in the state's eyes. You stood at about 409 students. So you had, over the last 3 years, a fairly steady decline there of about 10 students per year. Nothing near the decline that you were experiencing about 10 years or so ago when it was a much steeper decline. Taking a look at the 3rd through 5th enrollment, very similar pattern there, a flattening of the enrollment. We had about a 12 student decline in the last year, and it was flat in the prior year leading up to that. But overall, at those lower grades, as we saw on that bar chart, we are seeing a flattening overall of the elementary enrollment. As we move our way into the middle school, we're seeing a very similar trend there, where over the last few years we've averaged between 580 and 590 6th through 8th grade students. And then still looking at the high school, we haven't experienced any of the dips that we've had at some of the lower grade groupings. As it stood on October 1st, you had 792 9th through 12th graders enrolled, down about 20 students from the year prior. So to give a little bit of a primer for those who haven't seen it before, when we look at enrollment projections, there's various ways to do it, but really sort of the standard methodology is to go through a cohort survival where you really look at each grade grouping and how it changes, grows, or shrinks from one school year to the next. You'll see as I delve in a little bit deeper into persistency ratios, how we factor those, how we look at those in light of changes in housing, changes in demographics that are broader than just your public school system, looking at economic conditions, and looking at transfers in and out of systems. So those really help us explain and identify what is real within these ratios, so it's not just a mathematical exercise. We come from both the demographic, the demographer background, as well as the city planner background. So we look at it from not just the straight math, we look at really what is the understanding behind the numbers, what are the key drivers, and what is the likelihood for these underlying conditions to continue. And then we factor those into our mathematical models. So oftentimes you'll have different demographers in different communities where they look at it as a strict linear relationship. We've learned a number of years ago, especially as we delve into the analysis of birth and K, that it's anything but that, especially in Connecticut's Durg A and Durg B schools over the last 10 plus years. So this really does a good job of explaining sort of your waves of students as they move through the system. And in the black, I highlighted really the 2006, 2007 kindergarten class there. And you could see as they begin to sort of track through that system in that steady green line. In all of these charts, it's just a heat chart with greens showing the larger grade cohorts, yellows and oranges sort of in the middle, and then the deeper oranges into the reds, except for the kindergarten showing your smaller classes. So, you know, this class right here represented a time back in 06, 07 when you had 2,610 students within the pre-K-12 system versus today where you have about 2,278. And we could really sort of break those into various groups, sort of the pre-recession group there as we had the larger classes moving through, graduating classes of, 200 plus students into the more recent times of where we're seeing some smaller classes begin matriculating then through the system and really working our way in. And you see those green groups, those larger classes beginning to pass, those larger grade cohorts beginning to move on. And then really sort of where we're at today, the influx of those smaller cohorts, the kindergarten classes of 110, 130 students as they begin to move into the system. And that's where we're seeing that stabilization and that you're flattening off and that all of the grade cohorts that were within each group are very similar in size, and the one that has passed is very similar to the one that has now replaced it. So you're at a point of stability there from the, at least for the elementaries and lower elementary school enrollments. One thing we always look at as we get into this chart, and I'm not going to go through the madness of all the ratios, but I'll point out a couple key factors. What we see over and over again within Weston, and each community is a little different, is that you grow enrollment or you add students as they move through your elementary school system. So as we look at students moving from K to first to second, you're adding to those grade cohorts. So where we see numbers like 1.04, you're looking at, say, a class size of 100 kids in first grade would then turn into 104 kids in second grade. So there's a net immigration of students, and your inputs are exceeding your outputs or your loss of students. One other big factor that we track is your estimate of migration, where we really look at your second through seventh grade and then your third through eighth grade overall and see how there was changes in that collective student body. And even though this year you had a little bit less immigration into the system, but still positive at 2.4, overall you averaged about 3.5 over the last 2 years, so right on par with where you've been during the recent past. We spend a lot of time in our report talking about birth decay and talking about kindergarten. I think this chart does a really good job of being able to analyze that. So when I was first brought on board several years ago, it was at a point in time where your birth decay had jumped well above 2, and it was bouncing around from year to year, making it very difficult to follow a traditional means, which the birth decay was sort of always the standard, and generating kindergarten projections, where there seemed to be very little rhyme or reason. And as we started looking at all of our client communities and grouping them and taking a look at what their collective experience looked like, we really began to see that, as in Weston, similar to others, where years past in 2001, 2002, a large part of your kindergarten class was related to births and births that actually occurred within your community, and a very small portion of that kindergarten class resulted in immigration. So students who may not have been born in town but moved in at some point between 0 and 5 years old before entering as kindergartners. And then as we worked our way through, had the Great Recession and started to see a change, last year brought about a point in time where you had about a 50-50 split, where about half your kindergartners were students born in town and half your kindergartners were students that were born elsewhere and moved into town. We began to really start to see the relationship of having to use housing sales, the market, the conditions there, as a much better proxy for what's likely going to occur for your kindergarten classes than just relying solely on births alone. So for our kindergarten projections, we do still do the standard traditional cohort survival, take a look at it. However, we don't ever follow that traditional linear relationship where just because last year may have been a 2.0 birth decay, we think this year's going to be, or this year's going to be a 2.0 and the following year is going to be that. What we do is we establish this variable birth decay where through a best fit line and a best fit equation, we're able then to best manage what that kindergarten expectation should look like based on those number of births. And then we also go with this regression-based approach where we use the historic births as well as the housing market data to be able to project directly what kindergarten's going to look like. And that's the methodology that we fully employed last year with good results. So what we're doing is we're essentially blending two methodologies together in order to get an output for kindergarten that's a little bit different than what's done in a lot of places, but I feel that it's working very well right now in Weston, and based on what we see as some of the economic conditions going forward, we think it'll likely work well going into the future. So for those that like formulas, this is what our regression equation looks like. When we look at the statistical significance of it, or the R-squared value, it has a strong R-squared value. What we basically do is we lag BERTs 5 years and lag home sales 1 year in order to be able to generate what future kindergartners are going to look like. And as part of our model, since we don't know what the home sales will look like in the future, we do know what the BERTs, thankfully, will look like in the future. We can go out to 2019 with those. We have to then make some assumptions on sale price, total number of home sales, and what we've been using as sort of our standard, or the model that we see best fitting, is really that medium model here, where we're looking at annual birth rates between 62 and 66, home sales between 150 and 180, and sale prices staying even in between about $700,000 and $850,000. So going through that, what that yields is really 3 different lines. The 3 different lines represent the 3 different trajectories for all of the enrollment drivers that impact what's happening in your public schools. So what the blue line is really looking at, and it's not only just getting into that kindergarten equation, but it's also getting into looking at your persistency, so your growth within grades. But the blue line looks at is saying if there were to be a downturn in economic conditions and all of those drivers I had just talked through were to slow down, your likely trajectory would be just under 2,000 students going out 10 years in 2030. The red line, which we're calling it our medium, but we're also saying it's the one that most closely matches your conditions, would look at an enrollment of about 2162 and a real flattening of the enrollment for the better part of the next decade. And then the green line, which would represent a notable uptick in all of those underlying conditions, is giving us a yield of just over 2,300 students out to 2930. And what this is just the by grade projections for your system, with holding the most recent pre-K number at 27 steady going forward. Not something I'll spend a lot of time on. I'd rather dig into the individual school projections. So for Hurlbut, what we're looking at overall there is we're looking at some undulations within the data, and when you group only a handful of grades within a building and have larger cohorts, you tend to have some changes from year to year as a larger second grade passes is replaced by a smaller kindergartner. But overall, we're looking at just under 450 students there projected out going for the next 10-year horizons, with a little bit of a dip, a little bit of a bump and a little bit of a dip, and then really a slow and steady climb upwards to 449 students out to 2930. Over at WIS, we're projecting a slight drop there initially, and then a recovery, and then another little dip there before it really flattens out anywhere between 470 to 500 or so students at the end of that 10-year projection horizon. And then for the middle school, we're seeing really flat at the initial outset over the next 5 years, and then we do have a notable drop off as we move or matriculate a larger grade up into the high school, and it's replaced by a smaller grade. So that stands and that jumps out a little bit, but then it really flattens off at just south of 530 so students, anywhere between 510 and 530 for the last 6 years of that projection horizon. And then as we get into the high school, we see a slow and steady decline early on, and then as some of those larger cohorts that I had flagged in the green colors early on, or the light yellows, are getting replaced by those oranges, we begin to see that enrollment drop off at a much greater degree, especially in the last 5 years of that projection horizon. As I noted early with the persistencies, this is just a really historic pattern that we saw overall, where you have growth early on in the elementary schools, you have immigration happening, and then it really sort of stabilizes at middle school, and you do see some stabilization and loss historically there into the high school, but this is really just driven by those larger cohorts moving on and then being replaced by those smaller grade cohorts, not something that's going to be dramatically changed by any of our assumptions or underlying conditions, because really those students are in the system and they're going to progress forward similar to as they have in the past. So to touch on in a little bit of detail, some of the key drivers behind it, looking at the overall population change for the community, the American Community Survey had the town of Weston at 10,370 odd, 70 odd residents as of 2017. Looking at that benchmark relative to where the Connecticut DOT, who is one of the sources for projections statewide, is projecting some growth from that point right here out to about 11,900 residents in 2040. When we took a look at the same DOT projections with respect to Connecticut, the growth trajectory for Weston matched Connecticut. However, in their projections, it did not match Fairfield County very well. When we looked at the same ACS data and looked at the really the population change on both sides of Weston Center, which is right here next to the schools, these are some of your typically more dense neighborhoods. Going out to 2015, we did have some growth there. However, there's no more recent data than the 2015 or sometimes the 2017 ACS estimates, as the census is planning on fielding this information in the coming year, and hopefully they'll have it out towards the end of that year so we could use it for our enrollment projections, but likely looking at early 2021 to be able to have that 10-year refresh data. This is just a good look at your population density throughout your community, looking at your average persons per square mile, as well as where those typical densities are within your community. As we took a look at the ACS data and looked at how your community has changed, what we identified was typically your larger population cohorts are really in that 45 to 49 category, growth there into the 55 to 59 category as well, the two largest there, as well as sort of your school-age children there in that category of those over 5 through 14 years of age. When we compare that to 2010 to 2017 change, we saw the greatest losses overall were in that 35 to 49 category. Even though the 45 to 49 was one year larger, it did experience some loss in that 7-year time frame, as well as aligning with what we've seen in the school system, some loss of those school-age children, and the largest growth has occurred in those 55 to 59 age cohorts, as well as those pushing up into their mid-60s. Probably not a surprise demographic number for anybody in the room. When we took a look at the most recent information for females of childbearing age, which is always a good indicator of what likely future births are going to look like, and as we've seen fairly steady births overall for the community, we've seen from 2010 to 2017, there's been really a flattening those of females of childbearing age. There was a big loss from 2000 to 2010, which you could track in the birth number, but the most recent data has that number flattened out. It'll be interesting to see what it looks like once the 2020 census is fielded, because historically that's always been a good mathematical model for us to be able to go through and do a demographic projection for births to be able to get a good feeling of what it looks like going forward. And unfortunately, the data is a little aged now to be able to do that with it. Overall, your births have really flattened off over the last 5 or 6 years. I believe for the most recent estimate, which we have half-year data for the DPH, so we're estimating this year will close at about 66 births or so, a little bit higher than where you've been, but on par. It's been fairly flat really since you had a small little peak in 2014 of 71 births. Taking a look at the larger unemployment rates, seeing the gap narrow between Weston local unemployment rate as well as that of the state, but still trending to that 3% mark. Overall, showing improvement and following that same trend line that we had last over the last several years, which is impacting some of our model work that's regressing the kindergarten there. So I won't bore you with the overall summary, but population growth is slow. DOT is projecting some bit of more growth over a 20-year time frame, and really your births have flattened out to average around 60, 61 annually. I think one of the big things going forward, and we had discussions on this as part of the 10-year plan of conservation development, it's really sort of focusing on those homeowners and those in the community that are over 65. So I highlighted in this chart those categories there. We did really kind of focus on that 2010 to 2017 change. So homeowners over 65 in your occupied units, we did see a little bit of a drop off in that from 2010 to 2017. So a little bit more out migration there of individuals selling their homes and less either aging up or moving in, as well as taking a look at the other big one would be really the average family size and then the average household size. So your average family size has been fairly stable from 2000 to 2010 at a 3.3. The ACS has it at 3.01 for the most recent estimate, and I will point that out that these are actually fielded data, and this is estimates based off of smaller sample size, so there is some margin of error there that fluctuates. So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like from a 2020 standpoint, census standpoint, whereas overall we saw for the household size, we saw increase there. So it's getting into that shift of having some more households that are larger than your traditional family. So it's getting into some non-traditional family households there, seeing some growth in the size of those within your community itself. Taking a deep dive into your housing permits, that's the black line on the bottom. Weston's a fairly built-out community, not seeing a lot of subdivision activity in Weston or elsewhere in Connecticut, not to the degree that we saw way back in the early 2000s where there was a lot of subdivision activity. That market has really failed to recover anywhere in Connecticut, but based on the most recent data, you ended last year with 6 new permits, and this year saw 3 permits for our year to date. The bigger one is sort of the churn of existing single-family homes, and that's what we're tracking on the red line. So we had all these year-to-year undulations leading up to, and then really the heart of the Great Recession, and then since then you've really rebounded rather well, and you've been fairly stable between high 160s and low 150s for total number of sales overall. But the stability in that has led to stability in what we're projecting enrollment-wise recently. As we take a look at what your position is relative to some of the surrounding communities, as some of your neighbors, our year-to-dates based on the Warren Group MLS listings for single-family sale price, and I believe this was pulled for about 8 months of the year, was $687,000. Unfortunately, we didn't have that metric for all of the neighboring communities, but we did have it from 2008 through 2018, just to be able to look at what your level of recovery has been since the Great Recession. I think one of the key points is that Weston still has yet to be able to fully recover, whereas some of your neighboring communities who have the blue bar much closer to the orange or burgundy bar are much closer to a full recovery there. So still looking at remaining an affordable offering there, with the sale prices still a little bit stagnant there, and still being able to see that as those sale prices remain a bit stagnant, your housing sales are being fairly level at that 160 per year standpoint. So a little deeper dive into those over 65, looking at these units, and the importance of them is to be able to get an understanding of what's available out there, should there be opportunities for those to not want the 2-acre large lot, large property to maintain. About 21% of units overall are headed by householders over 65, so about 21% of your single-family homes could become available within the next decade, should they decide to be able to move on and allow for a younger family with children to be able to move in and take in all that's great in Weston, including the public school system. About half of the population, 65 and older, own their home free and clear, and in a nutshell, these are the units that are going to have likely potential to turn over in the future and provide a flush of school-age children. So overall, with our housing summary, we're seeing fairly stable real estate market. You have a housing stock that doesn't have a lot of diversity into almost all single family. you're reliant on sort of that one niche of the market area. However, it's a niche of the market area that also values schools and the types of communities that you offer. So we see that being a steadying factor and weighs in on when we do our enrollment projections. Based on the current zoning and based on our work for the town plan of conservation development, there's not going to be a lot of change from a zoning standpoint. You're a fairly built-out community. No change in your underlying values there of your 2-acre single-family residence. So not going to have a significant number of housing units going forward. I believe there's room for less than 24 or so future housing units as of right. You will see some turnover of homes from those over 65. Obviously, that's going to be dependent on local market conditions as well as larger regional market conditions. And that if you haven't done so, please partake in the town's 10-year planning process. And that's a little plug for my other project there. But overall, our takeaways from the enrollment portion of this work is really just to be able to keep tracking the enrollment. We feel that the two methods that we blend together provide a really good methodology for projecting your future K. We see increasing stability across the board in those other grade level groupings. As you begin to flatten out with your K2 enrollment, you're going to be able to see that flattening, as I discussed, within the intermediate and the middle schools over time. And then really with the focus of the decline that you had been experiencing within your lower grades is now really going to shift over into your high school grades. So be cognizant of that when staffing and space planning, at the high school level. And with that, I'll turn it over to the board for any questions you may have on any of the materials that we put together for tonight.
You did not include non-public students.
I didn't.
Can you talk about that?
I will definitely talk about that. Unfortunately, about 5 years ago, the state, which I presume from budget reasons, ended up redacting a large amount of that data. So the only non-public data that we can get through the State Department of Education is reliant on having a grade cohort of 50 or larger. So what that would mean would be if there was a private school, you would have to send at least 50 students in any given grade to that school in order for them to be able to provide that information to us. It used to be very helpful. It was great information to have and look at. It paints the picture on the other side of the equation. I've tried mightily sending emails, calls to be able to get this information back. However, it's fallen on deaf ears. So hopefully if Boards of Ed also ask for it, it would be great to be able to get that to provide it to you. It's only really useful when we work in larger urban systems like Norwalk or Danbury, where you have those larger groups, but you're still missing out on all the smaller groups. So I apologize for that.
Yeah, I have just a couple of questions on the numbers. So if you actually go back to slide 20, which basically looks at the overall projections. So, if you basically look at the projections going out another 10 years, the median looks down about 5% in aggregate from where we are today. The lower band looks kind of at the low double digits. I think it's around 13% from where we are today. Now, if you look at, there's going to be a question in here after I'm done, but if you look in the last 10 years, right, our enrollment was down kind of in the low double digits. But when you really look closely at how that splits up, PK all the way to, I guess, 5 has been down somewhere around 20 to 25%, and that's been mitigated by some stability in the upper grades. So if you look out, if you use that as a context and you look out another 10 years, right, the difference really between the median line and the lower line is really highly dependent on the lower grades actually increasing in population. And I guess the question is, can you discuss a little bit about the macroeconomic environment that would result overall in stability to an increasing enrollment in the lower grades? Really, because that's the difference between the lower line and the median line in the next 10 years.
I don't necessarily agree that that's the difference between the lower and the medium line over the next 10 years. In my professional opinion, what the difference in that line is that you're losing the larger high school grades and you're replacing them with the smaller elementary grades. The pre-K2 enrollment has really flattened off and will maintain that flatness over the next 10 years. We're looking at enrollment in 2029, 30 at 449.
Right.
Looking back to 15, 16, you had 447. It really is a micro dip, if anything, if we're, averaging out, say, 425 students and trying to say that that's a driver for the delta in those two enrollment models, when our delta there really is only maybe on average, 15 to 22 kids. It really is that flattening of the lower grades and the matriculation of those higher grades gone from the system. Once each cohort is very similar in size from elementary all the way up through high school, that's when you're truly at your trough, and then you will start to see incremental growth. We're not projecting any true growth over at the elementary right now based on what we're seeing.
Yeah, except PK to 2, you're seeing some 409 to 440, 449, right?
Yeah, that's 40 students over 10 years spread across 3 grades.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, but that's not changing the delta in the blue line and the red line that you were describing on that slide.
But the fact is that it's not changing the delta, but the fact is that it's actually, basically what I'm trying to say is that there's a certain macroeconomic rationale for, well, let's call it stability. Let's not even call it an increase. Let's call it stability. I guess the question is, where is that coming from? When the fact is that over the last 10 years we've seen a steep decline in those grades, I guess. But that's really my question.
I mean, you've reached the bottom. What we see is when you begin to really look at the individual grades and look at the groupings at a very small level. So if you were a pre-K5 school system, you wouldn't reach that trough so quickly, whereas your pre-K2, you only have 3 grades, and once you sort of flatten and reach that baseline, which we see overall again and again, there's historic data where you could see the 33-year cycle in Connecticut of peaks and valleys. You're at the bottom of that with respect to your elementary enrollment. The growth there is very marginal. What's driving that future decline is just the loss of larger grades.
Okay.
And the important thing to remember is as you come out of this trough, and let's all hope for the state of Connecticut's economy,
Right.
we all come out of the trough statewide.
Right.
It would be that incremental growth then happening again where you're seeing a larger kindergarten, it being the leading edge of something happening, eventually building into 1 or 2 grades as they begin then to move up, so you have that time until it actually turns into where you have growth overall.
Yeah. So are you seeing that, are you basically, so we've reached the bottom, is that bottom defined by birth rates, home sales, home prices? How do you define that bottom? Like, we're confident that we're at the bottom.
We've run a range of our K analysis, which looks at both the traditional birth to kindergarten relationship, as well as what your relationship is between when we skip births and go from home sales, unemployment, as well as your local housing conditions, really, the market overall, and a little bit of the births, and both of those are telling us that we've reached the bottom. Should there be a dramatic economic event similar to one that has happened, I don't think that will have that dramatic effect that we've had in 2008, because we are at the bottom rather than being at the peak when something like that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think just piggybacking on some of what Tony's saying, in going through your presentation, you're talking about the flattening and the stability that you've used when you've gone through some of your slides on 15 and 20. But when I come back to the historic enrollment, and I'm with Tony in the pre-K second here on slides 9 and 10, you know, you're still projecting drops. I'm not seeing a flattening out. So, and I don't see any statistics in the rest of the report that really mentions, you know, home sales improving or an end to the aging population maintaining their homes in Weston. So I struggle to see where you're confident that this is a bottom that's going back up versus a bottom that's continuing to just.
Yeah.
Bottom is just relative. Where do you come out with what pre-K to 2 will do next?
Your BERTs, which we have BERTs out to 2019, so that's a good indicator of your kindergarten class sizes out 5 years and 6 years past that. So when we looked at our future BERTs or our current BERTs, we've seen that on slide, and I wish I had it still up there for those in the audience. BERTs have flattened and are averaging around 61. So that is always a good indicator of what likely your kindergarten will look like. So we know those future BERTs are going to move into the system, but we also know that the housing market has rebounded. The sales are steady at about 160 annually. They've been steady at 160 annually. That those are going to be 2 stable drivers that produce kindergarten classes that reflect what we've seen.
I thought you said the housing had not rebounded in Weston. And Westport had, and New Canaan, you know, Norwalk had, Wilton had,
the sale price has not rebounded. However, your total number of sales, which drive students, that's the driver, have rebounded. Your sale prices are still below those of your neighboring communities. However, your total number of sales have rebounded to average about 160 annually.
But if what you're talking about is that the over 65 population, which you cited in your report as potentially turning over down the road for new families moving in, but if what we're struggling with in Weston right now is a demand for new homes in Weston, then isn't it going to be the opposite? Isn't the most likely result that as the population ages and there's a lack of demand for homes in Weston for young families, that the aging 65 plus population just keeps getting larger and larger because people can't get a reasonable price for their home? So I maybe you can help me understand that?
Yeah, there is. You have a lot of supply in your housing market, and we don't see it turning to a hot housing market. We're not saying that you're going to be locally a hot housing market. There's some communities in Connecticut that have turned into a hot housing market after the Great Recession. We don't see you being one of those. You're not going to rebound and dramatically grow in enrollment like you did back in the early 2000s, where you were on that precipitous rise in your student enrollment. All we're saying is that you've reached the bottom. You've reached that equilibrium with the housing market. There is going to be available stock as your community ages. However, we also recognize—
But only if there's demand for it, right?
You have available stock, and you've been averaging 160 sales. So it's clearly there's some demand for it. When you look back on slide 35, and you see that 165 sales, 150 sales, so that range of 160 sales looks very similar to your pre-recession levels of 2006, 147, 2007, 173. It's nowhere near the crash that you experienced here, where you were just over 100 for 2 years. So what this tells us is that there has been a rebound clearly in the total number of sales. However, you're likely never going to get back to your heyday of 230, 240 sales a year. There's a lot of other factors that, as demographers and projecting enrollment, we can't project what your likely future housing market will look like. We do understand your challenges here, but also when we look at the enrollment projections across the entire landscape, and what we've seen throughout history is when you do reach that bottom, the bottom then stays there and it rebounds typically. What we're looking at overall and what we think is going to happen is that just based on the fact that we have the larger baby boomer population in all of our communities, they were always the largest cohort. Then the Gen Xers were always the smallest. We were the smallest group. So you have less people buying homes, you have less people having kids, but then the millennials are going to surpass those baby boomers as the largest cohort. So some of that group very soon will be looking to lay down roots, being able to hopefully value things that generations before them valued in schools, community, and that larger demographic group will be looking to be able to buy into communities.
Have you done an analysis of the millennial group just generally in terms of what types of, environments in Connecticut that they're looking to settle in?
We've seen a lot of reports on it. I haven't been commissioned to do that analysis. However, what we are seeing in other suburban communities is that they are now starting to flock to some of those Durg A and Durg B schools. However, they are buying homes that are starter homes, and they are buying in areas that have amenities. Has Weston experienced that yet? Well, you haven't experienced that yet. And if we were thinking you were going to experience that in the next 5 to 10 years, we would have your projections on a different trajectory, where we have some of our other Durg A and Durg B where, they're growing now 3-4% and projected to grow 3 to 5%. We're not projecting that here at all. We're not saying that's going to happen here. But what we're seeing from our professional opinion is that you've reached the bottom. You have a stable market now, albeit it's not what everybody in the community would like from a sale price standpoint. However, you're still having people move into your community. We're seeing net immigration, as I talked about on that slide with all the numbers, that you've had a positive 3.5% immigration over the last 2 years. So with those 160 housing sales, you're growing, 3.5% of your student body from year to year when I look at your grades, 2 through 7 to 3 through 8. So there is a positive impact of what is happening in your economy. However, it's not anywhere near what you experienced 15 years ago, and it's not what some Westchester communities are experiencing, nor what some other communities are experiencing in the state.
I just, I don't know why you didn't mention this, but the housing price has gone down so dramatically, so I would think that you'd be looking at, families that may have thought that they were priced out of Weston would now, be looking at Weston comparable to some more affordable areas because Weston has become more affordable, so therefore you'd be getting those young families. Have you given any thought to like that, just that dramatic drop, as therefore increasing our stock of population? Because it's $200,000. I mean, it's very dramatic.
Agreed. That was that was my second bullet on slide 36. We have seen it, and we do think that's the case. We do think it's now you have broadened your range of potential people who would be shopping here for homes.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. What a price jump, if it were to fully recover, what that would do, maybe that would slow down that number of sales. Mm-hmm. So as I got into sort of the parameters I put around our regression was that your housing sale prices would remain in this stable range, not fully recovering, and it would also have that same number of sales because we do think the affordability is a big factor of now what's keeping your enrollment where it's at and bringing people within to the community. If it were to jump way up, mm-hmm. you may now eliminate a large pool of buyers who are buying here, however, to the pleasure of those that are trying to sell.
Right.
But I still think overall your stock is appealing to those with larger families. Mm-hmm. It obviously is. You're not looking for people coming in that aren't planning to start a family buying your housing stock. Mm-hmm. It's the stock that's tailored to that right now.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I just have a quick couple of data checks, and then I have a question. I just want all of us to be on the same page in terms of the total projection for this year for PK through 12 was 2290, correct? some of your data points on page 14, 19, and 20 indicate PK through 12 is 2278. So if you can just look at that, and then also that it looks like the same thing's happening with 2018 and 19. On page 6 and 7, PK through 12 indicates total enrollment at 2322, and page 14 and 15 indicate PK through 12 is at 2309. So just look at those 2 years on those 2 pages, or on multiple pages, because I just want to talk the same numbers all the way through. But my question is, and I can give you those page numbers again, Mike, to show you after.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Page 26, when you talk about the total population change, I want to spend some time on this slide because you give us total Connecticut, you give us Fairfield County, and you give us West End. You don't give us specific percentage increases or specific numbers for Fairfield County or Connecticut, but just by the look of how the graph is moving, Weston's trajectory is obviously, it's increasing based on your graph. And then when I just look at Fairfield County is stable within a decline.
Yep.
So I'm just wondering, if Weston is increasing, what county in Fairfield are they moving out of, or are they not moving to? Because just, again, going back to the home prices, et cetera, it's not intuitive that people are gonna come here. So what's driving then the flat to negative population in other Fairfield counties?
I don't know what the other towns are offhand. I will state, though, that the projections shown aren't my projections. They are the DOT's projections, so I can't speak to their mathematics of that. It's the only data source out there that does long-term projections currently in the state of Connecticut, but it's something that I could definitely take a look at and be able to get you an answer. I just don't know it offhand.
Yeah, I would just assume that Weston
Good, it's a good question.
would follow
The
the same
larger trend.
trajectory,
Yeah.
right, as Fairfield. But, you know, when you look at other towns like New Canaan and Westport and all these other towns that are retaining their home values, again, it's not intuitive that they would move here.
Yep, it's a good question. I don't know how they mathematically do any of it, but we use it as a good data point. We can't go and it would be great if they actually had other projections than fully explain what the drivers were for it.
Hi, Mike. I want to ask about pages 15 and 16, where we can track the migration of our grades as they matriculate through the district. Earlier on, we saw grades kind of holding very steady from the time they entered in kindergarten until the time they matriculated out. Our younger grades that we have now, they start out in that orange color, and then they're going gradually towards more yellow and then starting to pop into green. And then you see that showing out in that migration estimate, like for the past several years. Yes, we had the 2 years that were over 4%, but we still have been at 2.3, 2.5%.
Yep.
So we're having, basically that's saying we're having more people move in later to our district. Is that typical of other surrounding districts, or is that a unique Weston trend that you're seeing?
I will speak to, offhand, I have just done a couple of reports. It is similar to Westport, it is similar to Ridgefield, it is dissimilar to Darien, where they typically have a loss throughout. They don't immigrate as to that same degree overall. I think what we're seeing too is it's not just the children that are in, say, grades 2 through 5 or 2 through 6. I think, as I showed on the chart, I think as the families move in, they're likely coming in with a child in Hurlbut or WIS, and then maybe one who's not yet into the system. So as we sort of saw that shift between born here versus moved in, I think, based on some of the analysis that we've done, they're likely having older sibling in intermediate school, younger in elementary, and then maybe the third about ready to enter the system overall. So I think it has a larger impact from what we've been looking at, and I do see in some communities have that similar trend of, being attractive and being one of the communities driven by schools where there's that movement in. But also what we can't really figure out in a smaller community like this is what part of your share are you capturing a greater share of that private market right now, and that's where it sort of leaves us with a gap in it, and we just have to make some assumptions there. Whereas in years past, you'd be able to get the data and say, boy, we're either losing to a private market, so it's not just the movement into the community, or we're gaining from a private market. We're doing a better job of what we need to do, delivering education.
We may not know exactly where we're going, but we certainly know where we've been. And so I'm wondering, and I think I always get a lot of intuition from looking at reality versus projections and doing some back testing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, I know I don't think you did the last, going back 10 years, we have a projection we have a 10-year projection that was done 10 years ago, right? We knew what the macroeconomic climate has been. I'm wondering if we can just, plot actuals versus projected for the past 10 years in the way it's done here, overall, and then by the school, to get some intuition as to, I think it would, I don't know for the rest of the board, but it would certainly give me some real intuition as to what the projections were like, what reality was like, and we know what we lived through.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would help inform us as to, obviously, it's dependent on where you started, and if you feel like we're at the bottom, that may not give you the right, intuition, but it certainly will help in giving us some intuition about what we could expect if the economic conditions continue like they were in the last 10 years or even improve. But I don't know. I think it just gives a little bit more weight because it does contextualize a lot of that data. We have the data. It's probably easy to put together, right? I don't know if you think that would be valuable.
So what you're asking, Tony, is, for example, looking at slide 15, where simply this is the actual, it'd be saying what we knew from the projections at that point, going back in those 10 years.
Yeah, even start with totals. Just real simple,
Yeah.
right? Just real simple. It doesn't even have to be complicated.
Right.
Because if we, I think you get different intuition if we've tracked the expectation, or we've tracked the lower band, or we've tracked the upper band. I think it helps, giving us a little bit extra context and intuition.
Mike, you and I can certainly discuss that.
Yeah, I only have 3 years of our projections. I believe we did our first one in 2016 or so. So I wouldn't be able to go back 10 years for my own projection.
But we do have.
Yeah, the trick would be, that would just be, I think it's just what was projected. Again, a very different firm doing these things, frankly, in a more limited way. But you could look at that and then see how it lines up and compares.
Yeah, I think just simple,
Yeah.
you don't have to do, it doesn't, have to be complicated.
Yeah.
Right?
One thing I should say, because I think only one of the board members here had dealt with NESDEC, which is an excellent firm. They solely do enrollment. So most of the conversation you had today, you'd not want to be able to have with them. So I think several years ago, when I recommended the shift, the board agreed. It was embracing NESDEC, great firm, very important. But given how complicated the enrollment situation is in Weston, Malone and McBroom brings you all the multiple variables, housing, employment, all the rest, which NESDEC can't do. They're not based in the state. They don't work in the state. It was a fly-in presentation. Typically, actually, Lewis did the presentation, did a good job. But we made the shift to, given how complicated this is, and it has been a declining enrollment. I've been saying we're declining it, but you can see where it was going off the cliff. It's flattening some, but it's trying to understand. On this incredibly complex issue, the takeaway today is you project something, but how does that relate to the historic, and how can we be confident in the projections? So I think working with Mike and Malone and McBroom, they're about best positioned to help us with that. Plus, they're working in the town more broadly right now.
Absolutely. I'm not
Yeah,
questioning. I just think it's a good, whatever the
Reality
data
check.
is, it's a good extra piece of
Yeah.
information. I also think that, you actually, I mean, we focus mostly on the expectation, but there's, you ban that, right? You ban that around a high and a low. And I think that for planning purposes, those are three pieces of important information. Because we all focus on the expectation, but you actually have a band around that of uncertainty.
I do.
And so while hope is an okay strategy, I think the fact is that we
Yeah.
do have an upper and lower band to actually work with, to discuss, to figure out what the implications
yeah,
are.
yeah. And we now have 3 years of data. We know the band is about a 1%.
Band, yeah.
Yeah, I
Every
mean,
year.
so we're at a 1%, some of the great, so we already have a sense here. So as you can map that out, and I think that's what Mike's done, is that you can, we're in a declining situation, nobody's saying we're not. It's
Yeah.
the extent to which,
Right.
that is. I mean, if you look at the housing issues, if you look across the area, it's the one community that's not rebounded.
Yeah.
It's right down there at the bottom with Easton in terms of housing value rebound. I mean, that's some pretty
Right.
tricky stuff.
Yeah.
And
That's all laid out here. You would not have had any of that information to look at with the previous,
And-
Yeah,
And we have the broader context too of working in other communities in the state. Some are similar, some are very different, as well as working in other states to see what's happening there. Working in some communities within New Jersey that have gone through the decline, rebounded, and are rapidly rising. So leveraging that experience overall of what we've seen throughout our careers with the information and what the information's telling us with what we know about your community.
I really appreciate this report, Mike. It's very, very useful. I'm looking at your takeaways, and any way you read these takeaways, they all articulate clearly that we are heading into 10 years of decline. And it's hard to not say that out loud again. The implications of that are for us to figure out. But I'm not clear on why a minute ago we were characterizing this discussion as us being at the bottom of the trough and that things are going to look up when the takeaways are painting a picture of 10 years of decline.
I was focusing earlier's discussion on the elementary enrollments to that question of you've reached the bottom at your elementary enrollment level. You're low 4s right now going forward. What we're looking at for our projections for the pre-K2 for Hobart on slide 22. But we are seeing to climb out of that ever so slightly. But you're still not going to overcome the loss of larger grades moving through the middle school, moving through the high school. So your overall trajectory for your entire system is this decline. You're not in the rapid decline that looks like a double diamond ski slope that you once were or some of our other client communities are in. But you're in a slow decline. But I think the point of it is that we talk leading edges, and in a suburban community that's single-family housing stock, that doesn't have multifamily housing, it's not dynamic from a real estate development, you have a clear leading edge. And your leading edge is your elementary school. So as you see those grades come in and slowly grow, as they always have historically, no matter what, Great Recession, you saw that same pattern. That's a good indicator of what your longer-term future is going to look like. That's your check right there of what it's going to likely look like. You're not going to get a massive influx of 300 high schoolers like we've seen with our clients in Danbury in one summer. That's never going to happen here. So understanding your community and that you're still in a decline, however, your leading edge is your elementary, and we're seeing that bottom out and begin to very slowly rebound at the last 5 years. That's kind of our message in that. Don't plan for growth, plan for the decline, but the decline is going to be slow, and it's going to be focused on the upper grades.
Any more questions?
Thank you.
thanks, Mike. So we go to the MOU now.
Yep.
Louis, you got the MOU?
Yeah. Next item is the MOU.
Thank you.
Before you start, unfortunately, we can't actually take questions from the community unless it's during public comment. So reserve it for the next public comment.
Correct. Thank you. As you know, the memorandum of understanding before you was discussed just previously in a collective bargaining meeting, an executive session which we just held. It's between the board and AFSCME, which is the group that represents most of your non-certified employees. That's your paras, your administrative assistants, custodians, groundskeepers, so forth. This MOU covers a number of issues that have been under discussion with the union over the last few months. The big items here are, first of all, the board negotiated the right to permanently outsource the maintenance of the athletic fields. As you all know, this was a big issue last year. And we went and contracted with professional athletic field maintenance companies. However, there were some labor issues surrounding that, given that it had been done by members of this bargaining group. This MOU, if ratified by the board, would give us the ability to do that on a permanent basis. There are some givebacks for that. We will be adding one groundskeeping position starting next year. We have a much reduced groundskeeping staff in the district by several positions over the last few years. This would bring your total number of groundskeepers to 3 beyond the 4 person. So that was one of the givebacks. There was also an ongoing issue regarding the proper grade level of the library paraprofessionals, and that has been rectified with a slight upgrade, along with some other related issues having to do with overtime and the use of compensatory time at the option of the employee in lieu of overtime. That was really to correct a long practice that we had been engaged in, just to make sure that we're legally able to do so, because there are very normally, without agreements of this type, there are strict rules of when compensatory time, comp time, commonly known, would need to be used. So the union has approved this. It is signed by their president. If you ratify tonight, I will have Dr. McCursey, I believe I put him on here, yes, have Dr. McCursey sign, and we will proceed.
You have a motion?
Move that the Weston Board of Education ratify the memorandum of understanding between the Weston Board of Education and Local 1303-110 of Council for AFSCME AFL-CIO.
A second? Approved? Okay, motion passed.
Thank you very much.
Next is a discussion and vote on preschool tuition.
One second.
You're good.
So what we have before you tonight is we did a comparison of our comparative Dirk A schools just by the overall tuition that they have for the year. And we did a further analysis of, in Dirk A, those schools that have similar operating hours. In our finance committee, we decided, or it was requested that we expanded this list for local areas private school for their preschool tuitions. So after we did that analysis, we came up with a recommendation for FY 2021 for the tuition to be $7,000 for residents with children without special needs.
sorry, what was the proposal? I'm trying to look on the.
Oh, that's,
there it
that's
is.
on,
It's
on page one, first page?
I got it on the top of page 1.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Just for the public, I think maybe, Mike, if you could actually take a moment and explain how our preschool program works, when we're talking about typical students versus the.
Sure, of course. So we do run a preschool here in Weston. Right now, there are 3 classrooms. We can accommodate about 30 students. The primary purpose of the preschool is to work with students who have identified needs through the special education process and provide them the services that they need in those early, really important intervention years. To help facilitate that progress, we do tuition in students, other 3- and 4-year-old residents, into the preschool. They do pay what is currently a $6,250 tuition annually to participate in this preschool process. They receive the same learning that all of our other students do that participate. It's a great program to have both students with and without disabilities participating together. And the information here before you is really just to consider that tuition for the next year and make a decision on that.
Yeah, considering the comparisons, the quality of the program, and the number of hours that it's offered for, it seemed like that was a justified and appropriate price point to move it to.
Yeah, I do just want to acknowledge for the record, I know it is a big jump year over year from $6,250 to $7,000, but I think in cases like this where we need to kind of reset the playing field to just look at the landscape and see what we have to offer versus others, $7,000 is still even well below the average of what's out there. And just to highlight for members of the audience in terms of what we're looking at in terms of comparison, you've got learning community at a little over 10,000, co-op a little over 11,000, child's place, 10,500, and then and those are private. Yes, I know. And then Landmark and Reading and Westport north of 15,000. So having a child enter into the Weston school system in a preschool age, to have them acclimate to the teachers, the process, the building, everything, there's so many perks to that, and I support the recommendation.
Can I have a motion?
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the proposed fiscal year 21 preschool tuition rate.
Second.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Vote? Approved? Okay. Unanimously approved. Motion passed. Bill, financial update?
So for a financial update, against our current year budget, for the period ended October 2019, period 4, we've so far expended approximately $16,450,588. We have encumbrances of $33,915,276. We do anticipate to spend an additional $2,943,256, and we have a current projected deficit of $506,101. There's 2 primary drivers for that. First driver we spoke about last month that had to do with the addition of the paraprofessionals. What we have again for this month that caused the projected increase of the deficit is transportation increase for special education, which is currently at about $270,000. I do want to mention that we do have an ongoing process where we are reviewing areas of efficiencies. We do think that it's still too early in the year to start making any transfers to cover those deficits. But as the year progresses, we think it more than likely sometime during the 3rd quarter that we will make recommended transfer to offset or to mitigate some of these deficits that we currently have.
And I might add a little bit here. We talked about this in the Finance Committee, and Mike mentioned, obviously within the special ed area, everything we do is driven by individual student needs, and that may relate to out-of-district tuition, which, as you know, we brought from over $1 million over down to last year just $140,000 over. but there are other areas that based on needs that may emerge right when students join us. Their transportation needs, which often for particular student needs become, to serve them, there is an expense there. Staffing needs, and that's the four here, the paraprofessionals, those all are providing critical needs to students as those needs became clear to us once they were here with us this fall. And then obviously legal fees, which aren't showing here, but those are factors. But trying to manage to provide the best services possible, meet those needs for children, which is our first and foremost obligation within the special ed area. There are multiple things that, based on individual need, we're managing when we see those needs. I don't know if you want to add to that, but that's really what is at work here. We're confident we can manage this going forward. The last several years, we've had larger overages, which we've been able to manage effectively. But I don't know,
Yeah, I
Mike, if
think
you wanna-
I would just add that all of that is exactly accurate, and I would say that when Phil and I did look recently after the finance committee meeting to look at and drill into that transportation number, it is clear where the overages are from, and we've actually tracked it back. So I think we're on top of it. We'll continue to look for efficiencies, and hopefully we can mitigate it.
Yeah, I think that was the big discussion in Finance Committee, which is, I just brought up that I don't want to go too far into the year before we start bending the curve back. And so that's going to be an ongoing topic.
Just to highlight, in terms of transfers for this month, or in October, we have three transfers in excess of 5,000. The first was to offset increased costs for the executive leadership consultant of 15,000. The second is an early retirement incentive for 17,244. And the third was to mitigate increased costs for special education, ESY, or extended school transportation. Any question on that?
You have a motion?
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the transfers as presented by Mr. Cross in the 4th fiscal year 20 financial update.
Second? Lori, thank you. Any discussion, any additional questions? No? Bring it to a vote. Accept? Motion approved.
Moving on to the internal service funds. So year-to-date, we have expended I'm sorry.
Jump the gun.
So sorry. Just real quick, just to cover the internal service fund. We're expended 156,000. We're projected so far to end the year at 1,380,000. So that's pretty much an update. We have a slight uptake in terms of our theoretical average. We're trending just above average for the year. We had a high July and August, which typically are those months where, because teachers are out, everyone is out, they have to use more of the services. We're hoping that as the year progresses, that the average will tend to level out. If it does not, we may have a slight uptick, but as with everything else, we will continue to monitor that and we'll give an update.
Yeah, I think we should just let the record reflect that we approved the financial update as it was presented, as it was submitted in the papers. That brings us to board meeting start times. We like starting earlier, don't we?
Yes.
Okay.
I-
I mean,
Well, look, I trust me, we shifted the start of this meeting because we had two pretty meaty reports on the
Right.
agenda, and we wanted to make sure we finished at a reasonable time.
Right.
One, it doesn't leave us much room about executive sessions if we have things that pop up, because I think it's kind of hard for people to get here before 6 if we have something meaty that we need to deal with per an executive session. And then the other concern is, while I know we don't typically get a big audience, starting too early because of a large number of the people in Weston who commute, I just worry about making ourselves available to the constituents if they do want to attend a meeting if we're starting too early. That's just a concern.
So I guess the question is, how, when, do we have to commit, when do we have to commit about a start time? I mean, if we can see, if the agendas are lighter and there's no executive session, we can start earlier. I mean, it really, how much flexibility do we have in terms of
Well, I mean,
deciding closer to the,
it's best practice to set the time and live with that.
Yeah.
Because then you put yourself at no risk with the public of missing
right,
the notice. I mean, and we had this well noticed, there were people coming in, I noticed right before the normal time. My hunch is they didn't, despite the notices, see that we'd posted it.
Yeah.
So when you're shifting, you always, put yourself open to some criticism that somebody missed it, unless it's, many months ahead. And that's why I actually can't think of many boards of ed that will move it. They just set it and hold to it.
that's a good point.
And
What about holding the meetings earlier and creating agendas that reflect the concern about constituents not being here early, doing some internal business that up front and leaving public comment to later? Is that an option that's at our disposal? So that, not only do we have public comment a little bit later when people have made their commute and they're here, but also they've heard 2 or 3 or 4 discussions and can make their public comment after having their discussions.
But I still worry we would be conducting our business before they would get here. It's not just allowing them chance for comment. It's
Yeah, you have to balance that with, some of these topics that we cover. I mean, the enrollment tonight would have been challenging maybe an hour later. I mean, it's,
Well, that's why
we're all
this
up
was a
early.
one-off.
Yeah, no, I
Right.
appreciated the earlier start personally.
I mean, and you can also look at a 7, unless I'm forgetting when you typically started. I mean, you can move it earlier than the 7:30.
I think just given our history last year, the earlier the better. But I don't know, I mean,
I agree.
I'm willing to listen, to how early you want to go.
I think so too.
6:30 executive session, 6:30. Full meeting, 6:30.
That doesn't give a, I mean, there are executive sessions that really went on for a bit, for an hour as well, so, which would mean that if we do have a 6:30 start, some executive sessions would have to start at 5:30. That's,
We also have executive sessions at other, well, I know we have executive sessions at other times, and they don't have to be right before the meeting.
Everybody's here though.
Often they're like tonight, where you have to deal with a item
Yeah.
ahead, so then you can be informed in the vote. I mean, you could move those around. It's typically boards based on board membership, but you may determine this differently. They try and put them together so board members can plan, so they
Yeah.
know this is my evening for board work. We already do demand a lot of you as board
Yeah.
members from the committee meetings during the day. But it's really, I mean, it's up to you. The one thing there are ones that you do need to have right up against it, such as tonight.
But we wouldn't have Gina's concern, for the executive session, because those are
Exactly.
private. And I would imagine for you guys too, it would be more convenient to have it
Well,
closer to the end of your day. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've done with the principals is, I give them flexibility when it's a topic that pertains to them, they're here. When it doesn't pertain, I dismiss them. That did not happen before. And so you can see now it doesn't pertain. But yeah, when they need to be here, that's much better for them. I know it's much better for any of the administrators. I think the point is 6:30 too early for the public, and this is your decision. I just would urge you to be consistent, because once you've set
I
the,
think you're right.
then
I think we
nobody
need
can
to be
say,
consistent.
because even when we notice things 50 times, people don't seem to see it. So,
You know, I think if we go to 6:30, we're going to have situations where we're going to be here early for executive session. I just, practically speaking, so you're going to have to consider that. I mean, I don't see any way around that. 7 o'clock. I think that feels, that, yeah. I think you're right. I think, because this way it gives us some leeway of going to executive session at 6, giving ourselves that hour, starting at 7. I think that might be a good compromise. And then to, you know, when we look at the agenda, also, you know, look at potentially, you know, there's ways of going through the agenda as well where we could submit documents and also, you know, where it's practical to summarize, you know, discussions as well. But I think that probably is a good compromise.
So you're recommending
Recommending 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock?
Yeah.
So then what we'll do is repost all the meetings for 7,
Mhm.
and then we'll look at and we still need to load in the budget information. So when we get that loaded into the calendar, we can, you know, get that up to, I don't know if we have to adjust any of those meeting times. We'll have to look at that. We'll look and see if any on that one.
Bill, are we going to be able to like communicate this out like as a special email of some sort that like we've formally changed our start times
Yeah,
going
we-
forward, just to try to
yeah, we can-
over-communicate?
Yeah, we can do some blasts out on it. We'll just have to do several. Plus, we'll do one large notice out, and then I think in most cases, people will see it, so. Okay.
All right, let's move to the, no, I think we're good.
All
Let's
right,
move to
so
the super-
just to
yeah.
repeat, so 7 o'clock,
Clock, yeah.
regular monthly meetings
Yep.
instead of 7:30.
That's right.
Okay.
Let's move
Right.
to superintendent's report.
Sure, even though you're so far ahead of schedule, I won't drain your time. The main thing there are 2 items. In the super notes that went out this weekend, I did an extended update, as I've been doing on the school start end time task force. The task force is working very, very well. It's a very representative group. They're reaching out in very efficient ways. Key points that were brought up in the last task force meeting, and this is all tied to a long-term agenda, it's not just meeting by meeting, is the parent focus groups led by 2 PTO leaders. They did a upper school focus group, and then in early December they're going to do a lower school focus group, very well organized, good feedback, good insights, good analysis that was informing the task force really immediately on a set of things to consider. From the athletics side, which is a major consideration in any community for this, since at least at the high school, some 80% of our students are involved in athletics. Over multiple meetings, Mark Berkowitz has presented an analysis that's highly comprehensive, and I indeed shared it with the superintendent regional group, and they were incredibly impressed with all the key issues are there. Listed is, and it's important that's with our typically competing high schools, because frankly that's what matters, all of the SWC, but looking at time, transportation, scheduling, looking at length of day in each of these high schools, looking at whether they're considering changing start time. In the most recent past, since there's over a couple meetings, looked at percentage of lights, because that affects things, and travel time for contests or matches. So that's all being gathered. Again, the parent focus group very neatly wrapped up and analyzed, as will happen for the lower schools. In the next meeting, which is December 6th, we'll talk about whether we have to schedule more focus groups. If that happens, I may be talking with you as a board about if we're looking cost neutral still, which I'll get to, whether we need more time for more focus groups, which may affect the January deadline. After school programs, Joe Presipi from the town has done a wonderful job of not just representing his area in Parks and Rec, but all of the town representatives, and you heard that a little bit today, Tony, at the Weston Coalition meeting. And it's excellent analysis, very focused. We know that at the lower schools, our children have about 30 different after-school programs, which depend on certain start times. So, and again, nobody's saying don't do this, but they're saying here are the considerations we have to dig into. Transportation, Phil's been working to analyze that. The current options right now are cost neutral. I do think we may need to start looking, and Phil and Mark will talk about this, that if we have some kind of later time for athletes, we may need to have on hand a couple extra buses. The problem is every extra bus is $70,000, so we'll have to look at that. The Norwalk Public Schools, as you may know, made a big decision to, as of this fall, move to 8:30 start for their high schools. Very comprehensive report. We've studied that, looked at that as a task force. Our working guideline is how do we think about implementing, and to just milk everything we can for the implementation question. There is this roundtable of superintendents meeting. Unfortunately, because of some disciplinary hearings, I have to miss the next one, even though I recruited people for it, so I'll have to get on the phone and make amends. The next meeting, very importantly, will begin digging into schedule considerations. Most districts have made this change, have actually shortened high school time or made modifications to that schedule. So that's something that Ken and Lisa will be digging into, somewhat Laura as well. There's some different timings we're going to begin thinking about, which is if you can't get quite to 8:30, is there something else you can do to balance it out? We'll also in the next meeting begin looking at survey plans for staff, upper school students, middle and high school, as well as parents. The thought right now is to have to be a very targeted, focused survey to try and really get feedback on the various options as opposed to all the ancillary aspects of this. Most other districts that have done surveys, they're very large, comprehensive, that's meaningful, but I think right now it's trying to get feedback on if this is the time, what's your response? If this is the time, what's your response? Just to see, because right away the parent upper school focus group started to get this immediate trade-off between upper school parents are comfortable with this start time, but this is what then it means for the elementaries. And so we'll see what the elementary focus group says just on those options. Lastly, is it's pretty clear we're going to need to run some focus group, particularly for students who are involved in co-curriculars. So Lisa's been thinking about that. So the next meeting we'll begin digging into that. It's moving along well. It's a group really working. It's a representative group, getting a lot of good input. I'm not bringing out any findings yet because then we could start diving into one before we know how it all fits together. The plan still would be to bring to you in January a recommendation, but I don't want to shortchange feedback and all the rest. As long as some of the issues that may be a January or February issue, meaning budget, we can get close to understanding what's there. So that's where we are on that update. Let me finish the other one quickly. There may be some questions on, particularly on what I just talked about. The graduation date, we suddenly, per the state, have more flexibility in setting that date. Wilton has done that. What I'd like to do is bring to you in December a recommendation. If we can work this out, actually recommend, I've talked to Lisa. Lewis is looking into the law, because even though the law has changed, it's unclear. And so we would like to set it, recommend for June 11th, and then actually have you vote on that in December. What we're unclear on, though, and Lewis looked at the language today, is what happens if weather delays means school ends later than June 11th. Is this the Massachusetts model, which you may know means seniors are done, don't come back, we don't care? Or is it the Connecticut model where you still got to come back? And most educators, once you've given the diploma, goodbye. There are ways we can handle that, but we're trying to understand it. So I would hope as of December to be back in, because I know some families have begun asking you, given Wilton voted, and I'm trying to understand from Wilton how they interpreted the law. But that's what I would hope to bring to you. And the only other thing is I had promised you what's called, you'll get these tomorrow. Sorry. But Amanda Quaintance is wonderful at, and some of you may in your work life been through this, that someone sits in a meeting and graphically displays the meeting. So this is the graphic display that Amanda did here in the middle school of the DBT work at the November session, and she has captured it brilliantly. I mean, it's incredible. This is what I hoped to have sent you this weekend, but it wasn't quite ready. And then this is the next page from November, capturing the DBT, and it really puts it all in one place. And so Amanda's actually very excited that I'm going to share this all with you. So you'll have it digitally. You can send it to all of your aunts and uncles and friends. But so that's the supers update. So.
Anything from the committees? One thing that we should probably do a little bit more of in future meetings is at least bring some of the, any of the kind of big, any movement on some of the big topics from the committees. We should probably just give a brief update from the committee chairs going forward. I think it's just probably good practice to do that, you know. So the next meeting.
Yeah, so I want to make sure it's on everyone's calendar. December 9, we have the semi-annual recognitions assembly. Is that correct, Meredith? So you may remember we made a big shift, and I'm excited by it, but you agreed to move all the recognitions into semi-annual programs. So the first of those is the 9th. Meredith, if you've been in her office, you can see she's been working and the recognitions are piling up. But make sure you have that on your calendar, and we'll have to check the start time for that. I
Yeah.
think that would be probably 7 people would appreciate. The only other thing beyond what's listed here is just as I mentioned, I'll bring a recommendation, I hope, for you regarding the graduation date. And I'll also bring another update on the school start end time, but I'll tend to fold that into the superintendent's report. But you can see the meeting is, it's not a heavy meeting next month, but should be a good one.
Okay. Great.
Right? Yeah.
Anything else? I'd like to move to adjourn. Okay. Meeting over. Yeah.